Well, we have Brent Bowers with us here today. Brent, I really appreciate your time. And this is, like I mentioned to you before we started the show, a long overdue revisit of this topic because I always find this one especially interesting because Brent specializes in helping people generate passive income through vacant land. And I think we're going to have a great conversation today. I really appreciate it. But before we do, as I warned you, I want to make sure everybody has your contact information right up front. So besides your website, which is thelandsharks.com, that's with an S, thelandsharks.com, where else would they maybe reach out to you if they have any questions after the show?
Well, thanks, JD, for having me on the REI Mastermind Network. So to answer your question, you could find me on Instagram and Facebook, Brent L. Bowers. That's L as in Lima, Brent L. Bowers. And I'm pretty responsive to messages as much as I can be. So hit me up. I'd love to answer any questions I can.
So before we started this recording, you were talking about listening to a podcast of our own where we were talking about mobile homes and where can somebody really get started in real estate investing. And you joked that I at one point I might have mentioned in that episode that where can you get started in real estate investing for like less than $5,000? But you claim you can beat that.
Yeah, no, that was a great episode 192. I've always been interested in mobile home parks and buying mobile homes, never pulled the trigger on it. And I forget the guy's name, I apologize. I should have wrote it down, but he had said, yeah, where else can you get started in real estate for $5,000? And I was like, right here. Because my first land purchase was $285. And oh, by the way, I had a buyer lined up to pay me $5,000 the next day I bought it. So yeah, you could do it with land. It's unbelievable.
So let's start at the beginning. How did you get into this niche?
Man, that's a great question. So I was in the military, and for 8.5 years that I served in the military, I was maybe only home about 4 years. So I was looking for something better, trying to get rid of the W-2 job. I was just working so much in the military. So I was trying to get my house wholesaling business off the ground, and I hired a coach. So I was trying to wholesale houses, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like listening to all these podcasts, and I was just information overload. Like I would not drive a mile down the road without listening to a podcast. And I heard from this guy that was buying land at super cheap, massive discount, and turning around and selling this land. So I was like, man, I'm throwing away all my vacant land mailers, like my list that has vacant land on it. So I was like, I'm just going to mail these guys too. So I mailed them, and my phone exploded. This was back in 2016. I haphazardly bought some land and sold it and made some quick bucks, and I haven't looked back since.
Sure. So the land that you're acquiring, is it like within city limits? Are you looking at the outskirts of growth? How are you deciding what land to target and what to acquire?
Great question. Yeah, I like to say there's three major types of land, recreational in the middle of nowhere that you can build a cabin on or ride four-wheelers. And then there's the infill lots that everyone's familiar with. Our houses are built on those, buildable lots. And then you've got, I drew a blank, agricultural land where guys are farming it and ranching it. And then the fourth, industrial. My bread and butter is land in the middle of nowhere that I can buy super cheap, that the sellers want to get rid of, give me a massive discount. And then I turn around and offer the financing to people that want to buy land and have a couple $100s a month, and we sell it at a premium. So that's my bread and butter. I will do infill lots, buildable lots. Those are quick, fast cash as well. We'll sometimes finance those. Everyone that I sell, I try and look for the financing so I can continuously get paid for the next 5 or 6 years on it.
Sure. So this land that you're acquiring and identifying, you mentioned at first you threw away that part of your list.
Yeah.
Like, so are you getting this like through a list source, and is it something that's easily identified?
Yeah, and you can identify them, especially in list source, because you can actually pick the vacant land. I do now buy through PropStream, and they give a 7-day free trial with that, and I can share a link. But I first was starting, and I still do it now, even when I go to a new county or a new area, I get the tax delinquent list. And I also get another list that not too many people hear about or know about, and that's the county held tax lien list. This is land that's, or properties that are, they suck so bad that a tax lien investor won't even pay the taxes on it. So I mail those guys too. So I was getting the tax delinquent and the county held tax lien list, and I was just throwing away the vacant land. But when I started mailing those, that's what I was saying, that my phone blew up. But now, yes, I do pull lists as well, because those lists are pretty small and you burn through them pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. So do you try to engage them in some sort of conversation, or is it all just paper being exchanged, communications, or are you sending out blind offers? How does that process look?
We do a couple different ways. We start with a blind offer, and basically that I call it my LOL, my land offer letter. Because every time I get one back signed, I laugh out loud. I mean, I'm just like, holy cow, we just got this land at 30 cents on the dollar. And if they don't answer that, well, let me back up a second. So we generally want them to sign it and return it. We're not trying to do a lot of talking on the phone. We do put our phone number, and maybe 20% of the time we get a phone call. Are you serious? Go pound sand. Or
Yeah.
is this a scam? Or do you really want this land? Type thing. Those are like the 4 phone calls received. And we also give them the ability to fax it, email it, and mail it back to us. Those are the ones I love because there's not much communication. Well, after we've exhausted that, after they haven't answered that, we will then send a special postcard. And that also gets people to answer and call. That gets a lot of calls. Now, granted, I like doing the work on the front end, presenting that offer of what we can pay, because that gets a conversation started. And if they don't answer that, we send out a postcard, which is a neutral offer.
Mm-hmm. So do you focus on just part, like in your backyard then, or is this like throughout the United States? How do you select that?
I'm in 7 counties now, but I did start in my own backyard, and I don't do as much in my own backyard anymore. We do still send out offer letters for buildable lots, but I'm in Colorado Springs,
Mm-hmm.
and the area is just exploding with growth. So it's really, really hard to get a parcel of land under, 60, 70, 80 cents on the dollar. I'm not saying impossible. It is still possible. You just have to send out more offers and more postcards.
Mm-hmm.
I have branched out. I'm in Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, forgetting where else, New Mexico. And, I try and focus on other areas, which is really cool, is we don't have to look at this land. We've got so many resources. And who does my due diligence on land? She's in the Philippines. So she's definitely not looking at it. So you don't have to be in your own backyard, because, we're not limited by geography at all.
Sure. So you talked about due diligence there. You have somebody in the Philippines doing that for you, but what type of due diligence do you have? You're sending out these offers,
Yeah.
and she makes sure that it's not a big piece of swamp or something?
And we will buy a swamp. Yeah. So I have about 15 items that we check. And it's so funny, these 15 items are a culmination of all my mistakes in the beginning. We also run title, which is another guy that helps us out with that. But we want to make sure the land's buildable. And if it's not, that's okay. We'll still buy it. But we want to know, is there access to this land? I once bought a piece of land, and I knew it at the time. We had to trespass against state land. That was a really cool purchase. That was a $500 piece of land, and we sold it for, I think, $5,500 on financing. And I would buy that land back from that guy today for more than he paid me, because I sold it way too cheap.
Mm-hmm.
But and he got an attorney to get him access, so the land's worth $100,000 now. Are you allowed to have a septic tank, or do you have to connect to city water? Are you allowed to drill a well, or do you need a cistern? Little things like that. We want to know the answers to these questions, because 1, we want to be able to tell our buyer, and 2, if it is a junkyard or a swamp, which, by the way, I bought a junkyard one time because we didn't know to check Google Earth. We found out we had a junkyard. We sold it, but that's okay. And all these things, we don't care. We just use them for renegotiation or actual negotiations, things
Right.
like that. That's kind of part of my due diligence, some of those items.
Sure. So for the wholesaling and the houses, it's easy for us to determine the value because of the comparables that have
Yeah.
sold, and anybody can do that on Zillow or what have you. Is that similar for land?
Yeah, it's a little different with land. And I do not ever want to be the expert. And I teach my students, you don't have to be the expert. Let's rely on the experts, and who are the experts? Those are realtors. Most realtors do not deal in land, but there's ways to find realtors that do. One way, you can call a realtor and say, hey, do you know anything about this piece of land? If not, do you have someone you can refer me to? So realtors are usually the experts in comping things. So it's not like, okay, it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a 1-car garage on this side of the street. No, we look at like square footage. Is it buildable land? Is it infill lot? And or is it acreage? We try and figure like items. So we stay in the 1 to 5, 5 to 10 acres, because once you start getting higher acreage, it goes for less money per acreage. So I try and rely on the experts, realtors, Zillow.com, what the area is sold for, what's actually listed, and we deal in averages. And what do I mean by that? I look at Zillow, I look what the realtors say, I look what all the land websites say, like Land Watch, Land and Farm, landflip.com. And we take an average of all 3 of those. I mean, it's not super analytical. We try and do it in under 10 or 15 minutes. The longest is talking to the realtor. And we go on the average, and we're literally sending an offer at 30 cents on the dollar of what we think that property's worth. So we think that property's worth 10 grand, we're going to send an offer for 3,000. So there's room for error. There's a margin for error in there.
Mm-hmm.
We're just getting as cheap as possible.
Sure. So, how much of this due diligence or this information collecting do you do before you send out the offer, and what you do after?
So we don't do any due diligence or title search or even check for liens before someone actually raises their hand and says, yes, I'd like to sell my land. Now, granted, there is one thing we do is we figure out what we think it's worth, the average of what we think it's worth. And that's how we come up with our offer. That's the only due diligence we're doing. And we're trying to do it in like a subdivision, a micro type thing. We try and take the county and compress it. That's really all we're doing. We're keeping it very limited, because I know I have friends trying to get in wholesaling houses, and they sit for weeks doing due diligence on properties, and they haven't bought anything. Let's blast out 5,000 mailers, get someone to raise their hand, and then let's then skin the cat type thing.
Right. So before we go any further, I want to point everybody to your website and your contact information again. So if you would like more information, make sure you head over to thelandsharks.com and schedule a call. I think if you're interested in land investing, I mean, this is definitely a way to go. And as I've said a million times, you can either spend the 10,000 hours and become an expert, or look to somebody and learn from somebody who's already made that investment. So definitely reach out here. So with that being said, you brought up the information regarding, the due diligence and the mailings and how all of that works. I really wanted to drive something home there, because like you just said, when people are doing wholesaling on houses and stuff, and they seem to spend a lot of time putting all of their eggs in a few baskets, where they'll handwrite and send out a handful of offers in a month or a year. I mean, it's talk to how much is your response rate? How many pieces of mail are you going to have to send out in order to get the response that you're looking for?
So let's just focus only on our blind offers, not on postcards, because that's a little different response rate. And I love that you asked that, because I'm really big on tracking data and not focusing on drama and emotions. I mean, 4 years ago, I stopped mailing because I was like, oh my gosh, mail doesn't work anymore. So we need to do cold call. We need to do bandit
Mhm.
signs. We need to do internet. Well, guess what? It was during November, the election time, and no one was answering mail. And I just spent a ton of money on mail. So I was like, oh, that's it. But I didn't look at the past 12 months. So I love that you asked like response rate. We I like to track three things, actually four things. Three things on our key performance indicators or KPIs. You could probably hear that thrown around. KPIs, key performance indicators. Break it down very simple. I like to track how many I send, how many letters I send,
Mhm.
how much I spend to send those letters. If I spend $10, I sent 10 letters, just a quick example. And then how many converted contracts. So how much I spend, how much I send, how many we converted. So on average, I'm sitting at just a little less than 0.5%. So if I send out 100, well, let me back up. If I send out 200 offer letters, 200 LOLs, I get one accepted offer.
Mhm.
Now, it's flexed a little bit with the holidays and elections and COVID. It's actually went down a little lower because there's been such a great demand on vacant rural land lately, which is wild. It's also helped me with my inventory. So it's allowed us to sell it for way more too. So I'm sitting at about one accepted offer for every 200 offers I send. I generally try and send a minimum of 300 a week. And the reason why I can get away with sending 300 a week is now people really find out when you're the only person in your area buying land. Like you're the guy, you're the land guy, the land man, is what
Mhm.
I've been called. Realtors will send people our way. People call off of our signs when we're trying to sell land. And it's so funny. It's just like we've built it and now they're coming type thing. Kevin Costner movie, Field of Dreams. But right now I'm sitting at about 300 a week. On average, we get about a deal and a half a week we're buying right now. And then what's cool is we try and send to LLCs, limited liability companies, like because a lot of people won't mail LLCs with the house business.
Mhm.
Land business, I love mailing LLCs because guess what? I have bought more land from LLCs than any private Jack Haas or Mr. and Mrs. Beverly Smith, like whatever. Like we have the LLCs, they usually own 10 or 12 parcels. Or it's a land guy going out of business where he's sold his business and bought something else, and when his buyers default, he still sells me land to this day. That's just one LLC. So I kind of went on a long rant with that, but about 0.5%.
Yeah, no, that's interesting that you bring up the LLC because if you do go through some of that training when it comes to wholesaling houses, that does come up quite often is to exclude the LLCs from your lists. I
Oh, so
suppose it's
often,
to
yeah.
save money or it. I'm guessing that it's because you're not really in an opportunity to probably build rapport with the seller. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they exclude that.
Maybe that's it, and they're harder to skip trace, which there are some guys that can skip trace LLCs, but usually the LLC is trying to make money with it as well. I mean, I've been buying houses since 2007. I do still buy houses. It's got a lot of tax benefits and all that, but I have never once bought a house from an LLC
Hmm.
ever. I don't know why. I mean, we don't really we actually do mail them, but nothing ever comes back. And the ones we do mail are like usually tax delinquent, and they've got code violations and things like that. So we see there might be a problem, so we do mail those. But yeah, we've never once bought from an LLC. And the cool thing about buying land from anybody, it's just like so much less emotion. The seller has never laid their head there at night unless they camped on it. They usually inherited it, or their husband bought it 100 years ago. But what's really cool about buying land from an LLC, you think there's no emotion with just the individual seller. There's even less emotion with that LLC. It's just a black and white number. That's it.
Sure. So I'm going to just backtrack just a hair. You talked about I'm guessing it's a virtual assistant in the Philippines. How much of that work do you offload to her? You know, you mentioned due diligence, but does she reach out to the realtors and these experts on your behalf to do
Oh
some of that
yes.
work? Or how much does she take off your plate? Like, what do you have
I
her
have a
assigned to do?
team that does everything. Really, here's about what I do in my land business now. I just got off a 3.5 week vacation. We went to Florida. We took like a cross country camper trip. So we pulled our camper across the country and camped along the way, and then stayed in our lake house in Florida. So I see like areas. I'm like, oh, we should get in this area. That's where I come in. So
Mhm.
I'm like, hey, let's get involved in this area. So I don't do any part of the buying or the selling or the due diligence or any of that stuff anymore. I don't do the paperwork because I'm not good at it. Like I make mistakes. And so now I hire people that help me with these things, and they own it. That's their thing. And they do a way better job at it than I do. You show me a business owner that's struggling, I'll show you one without a team and that's doing it all themselves. They've really just bought themselves a job. I didn't want a job. I wanted to see something grow and explode and you know, do what it's doing today. And that's, give us financial and lifetime freedom, basically.
Right. So now we're going to jump into like the biggest question, because one of the things that is the most intriguing about what you do is the passive income part of this. So how does that work with land? And I know
I
that's
love that you
pretty a
asked that
broad
question.
question, but it's a big one, because I think that's where a lot of us, we're trying to establish that legacy wealth. How
Yeah.
can land help us with that?
I'll never forget, me and my wife, when we decided that we're going to go all in with land. I was flipping it. I was flipping land. I would buy one super cheap and then put it on Craigslist and find a cash buyer and just offload it at a wholesale price. And it was great chunks of cash, like really good chunks of cash. I mean, I remember one was way more than my Army salary as an Army officer. But we started looking at like okay, how do we get a monthly payment coming in every month? And when I was in the military, I had to figure out how to replace my $6,000 a month salary. So I backward planned that, but we started simple. It's like, okay, let's first take care of the car payment, and then let's take care of the house payment. And how many land deals is that? Okay, that's 6 land deals at an average of this much per month. So we looked at it that way. So we had a goal of, all right, let's do 6 land deals. How do we get the monthly financing? To answer your question, is we buy it at a massive discount from the seller.
Mm-hmm.
And I generally try and sell it now that the paradigm shift happened. I no longer wholesale it and just, dispo it super quick. The paradigm shift happened is like, why don't I sell this for what it's actually worth and offer it for a monthly financing? Because Americans, they think in monthly payments. How much can I afford each month? So we sell most of our land for $399 to I think $699 a month is where we're at now, because we've done a little larger deals. So what we do is we try and get a down payment large enough to cover the purchase price, or at least 20% of it. So if I'm paying, let's just say $10,000 for a piece of land, I want to get anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 down for this land. And let's just say it's worth 30, and I'm going to hold that financing. If I got a $10,000 down payment and I'm selling it for 30, I want to hold that financing for $20,000 at $699 a month for however many months. So at the end of the day, I'm trying to get most of my money back for what I've deployed to buy this land from my buyer as quick as possible and set them up on monthly financing. Most of our land deals were profitable in 6 months, that we got our money out of it, and
Mm-hmm.
then we can redeploy it for another piece of land. So that's
Okay.
how we do it. Everyone we look at is, this is going to add to our monthly passive income chunk every month. So when my when my land sales specialist sells 5 properties in 1 week, and they're all $200 a week, we just added $1,000 a month to our passive income, and I love it.
And how long do you typically hold that, essentially a note then?
Most of our mass majority of our properties, it's 5 years. We've been doing some larger developments. We just bought 27 acres, and we subdivided into 9-acre parcels. We sold all 3 of those on 30-year contracts, or 30-year mortgages, I should say, because there's one thing that banks have figured out, and that's mortgages. They pretty much front load for the first 5 to 7 years. It's interest only. So we pretty much, if we sell, $100,000 parcel on a 30-year note, if they do it for 30 years, if they pay for it for 30 years, we're going to collect about 220-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So it allows us to collect way more money. So the mass majority of them are 5 to 6 years though, but we're toying with 30 years now.
So do you use any kind of service or anything to manage these and collect the payments?
Yes, I do. It's a note tracking service, and I think, what is it? Easy. If you go to easynotepayments.com, you can check it out. It's amazing. Basically, what it does, and I'll actually, JD, I'll give you the exact link to go to in case I mess that up.
Okay.
But for the show notes. But basically, it's really cool. It takes the guesswork out of it. When you get to 100 notes of people paying you monthly, you don't want to be trying to track this stuff. It's all tracked for you. They pull the payment automatically each month. If the buyer's late, they charge a late fee. And for a while there, I never charged a late fee for like the first 2 years. But then we found that we had those people that were late every single month, and now I'm paying a person to help collect that. We did have to start charging those late fees, which kind of hurt me. But now it's actually kind of offsetting the price of that. But it's really cool, and the bookkeeper loves it.
So is there any kind of requirements, whether it's federal or state, that you have to be aware of when you're doing this type of notes at this type of volume? For land?
Absolutely talk to your CPA about this, because this was one of those things. I was dealing with this a couple of years ago because I was a little worried. I'd hired a new CPA that knew nothing about real estate, and he's like, "Oh my God, you're breaking all these rules, RESPA, Dodd-Frank, and this and that." So I hired an attorney and a CPA that's all they dealt in was real estate. So I'm no expert. Please consult your attorney or your CPA. But since we're not dealing in houses, it's vacant, raw land. They're not living there. They're not laying their head there at night. We don't have to worry about RESPA. We don't have to worry about Dodd-Frank. And one thing that my CPA told me was, if you buy it in 123land.com or 123 Land Entity, LLC, you sell it in that entity. That way you're not having to create a finance company. So we kept it very, very simple. We buy it in the same entity, and we sell it in the same entity, and we just collect payments. So luckily I found a great CPA, great bookkeeper, and attorney to make sure we were set up right, because we made a few mistakes in the beginning with that.
Sure. And then when we talked about the marketing that you do in buying the land, but what do you do when selling the land? What type of marketing do you establish regarding getting this sold
I
as
love that you
quickly as
asked that.
possible?
In the beginning, well, now that we were kind of established, in the beginning, I just used Craigslist. But I was like, okay, let's be omnipresent. Let's be everywhere. When someone thinks about buying land, I want them to think about my company, Zach Buys Land, or Vacant Land at the Free, or getland.org. So now we have multiple websites, but I still use Craigslist to this day. I have a guy that posts the ads for me. We use Facebook buy-sell groups. Those are amazing. And I'm going to give a quick tip on the buy-sell groups. What's going on right now in the northeast part of the country? And what's happening? It's getting cold. There's snows coming in. So if you own land in Florida or land in Colorado where it's super sunny, and it's snowing in New Jersey, Wisconsin, Michigan, these people are looking for a place they can go and get the heck out of the snow. So we post our land in those areas on buy-sell groups. There's also Facebook Marketplace. We're on all the major land websites, land.com, Land Century, Land Watch. We sometimes use realtors as well. And we collect the data. When people contact us, we ask, is it okay if we email you or call you when we have another piece of land? So we're always building our list. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So once you have a list, once you have a land sell, that's how you build your land selling machine right there.
Have you ever targeted, like, I'm guessing you run into quite a bit of farmland. Do you ever try to reach out to the farmers that are like next door?
No, I don't. I really stay in my lane, and that's recreational land and then infill lots, buildable lots.
Sure.
I had this preconceived limiting belief or preconceived notion, whatever you want to call it, that if a farmer's farming the land, if a rancher's ranching the land and has cattle on it, that's their livelihood. There's no reason why they need a discounted offer on their land. Now, granted,
Sure.
let's flip the coin over. If you come across 160 acres, it's agriculture and it's not getting farmed and it's not getting ranched, no sheep, no cattle, no horses, send that person an offer. I mean, granted, we do buy agricultural land all the time, but not operational farms and ranches. I don't
No,
even send those
that
guys
would make
offers.
sense. Yeah, that would make sense. So, like I promised you, we'd keep this to about 20, 30 minutes. So I usually try to end with if there was any question you wished I would have asked you here today.
Um, Maybe the mistakes I've made. I think about the listeners. Because after I first like probably 8 deals where I made a ton of cash because I was flipping the land really quickly, what mistakes I've made. And
Sure.
I got a little overconfident, a little cocky. So I would get a letter back. They'd accept my offer, and I was okay. The county says it's worth 30 grand. I'm only paying 3 grand. It's a no brainer. So I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't check out Google Earth. I didn't figure out if it was a free and clear like title or there's no liens or encumbrances or break in a chain of title. So I just encourage the listeners, lean on a title company, lean on a real estate agent, somebody that's an expert or even a coach. Don't make the mistakes that I did because I bought a couple parcels of land that were like treasurer's deeds. So the title was clouded for 9 years. I bought one that had $157,000 IRS tax lien on it, and thank God I did not record the deed in my name because that would have came to me. Just be careful with things like that. You can kind of get yourself in little binds, and luckily, I didn't lose money on any of that land. God willing, thank God. But I could have very well easily have lost a lot of money. But I hired a coach later on that helped me out with those things. But yeah, mistakes I made. I think that's always one way people learn is a wise person learns from other people's mistakes. A smart person learns from their own mistakes.
Right. No, well, I really appreciate your time today. Again, I'm going to point everybody to your website, thelandsharks.com. And I know that you provide coaching regarding how to pull this off and do exactly what you're doing. Definitely would highly recommend at least scheduling a call. And outside of that, anywhere else they should reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to hit me up on Facebook, Brent L. Bowers, or Instagram, really whatever's easy. I'm also on Skype, Brent L. Bowers. So,
Oh, you're playing with fire there, my friend.
uh-oh.
No, I appreciate it, Brent. And again, I hope that we can chat again sometime. I think this is definitely a niche that a lot more people should be looking at.
Thanks, JD, so much for having me on the REI Mastermind Network. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.